Hi, good evening. We're ready to get started. We are learning Maseches Rosh Hashana, Daf Tesvav. We're starting halfway down on the Dalet Amud Beis.
We're going all the way to the Mishnah.
All the way to the very bottom of Tesvav Amud Beis, yes. Just as a primer for today, we're very used to hearing about Hilchos Shabbos. We're used to hearing a lot of the nuance of Hilchos Shabbos. But today is a year of Shemitah. It's a year of Shvi'is. It's the 7th year of the cycle. And for those who are aware and keeping the halachos of Shemitah in Eretz Yisrael, these types of blot are very halacha l'maisa for them. So one of the primary chakiras that we're going to have today is as follows. Do we measure fruits as it relates to their status of Shvi'is based on Chanata? Chanata is the period right as the fruit begins to blossom and the leaf on the bud falls off. Or do we say, no, it's not the Chanata, it's the Lakita, it's when it's actually plucked from the tree. Now, to us, it's a theoretical chakira, as many aspects of Shas are. But for the people who actually live in Eretz Yisrael, these are huge nafkaminas. You could have an orchard, a massive orchard of food. If you follow Chanata, the time at which the fruit actually blossomed and the leaf fell off of the bud, then none of that is Shvis. And if you follow Lakita, then it's all Shvi. So there's huge nafkaminas. So we're going to be learning a Gemara. Let's try to like v'hafta l'recha kamocha, like put on the lens of a Ben Eretz Yisrael who owns a farm, because these Gemaras for them have tremendous fiscal differences for them. So we're going to get started halfway down in Yudalet Amud Beis. We'll go to the very bottom of Tesvav Amud Beis to the very last word. And the reminder that tomorrow morning we will be having Daf Yomi after the 6:20 Shachris. As a small silver lining, there will be no Tachanun at the 6:20 Shachris. Feel free to come join. Says the Gemara halfway down, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Omer lo minag beis Shammai uveis Hillel nahagba ela minag Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer nahagba. This comment is going back on a statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that we are careful on two maestros, and this is the very top line of this page of Yudalet Amud Beis. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, it wasn't that Rabbi Akiva was splitting hairs between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai in regards to Aleph Shvat and Tu B'Shvat, which one is the Rosh Hashana for Ilanos, but rather it was something else. It says the Gemara, what kind of opinion is that? Look back at that brisa. What does it say? Be'echad b'Shvat ke Beis Shammai nahagba. It says that he plucked it off the tree on Aleph Shvat. That's clearly like Beis Shammai. So the Gemara presents two answers. He says, no, that line of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda can still work. Amar Reb Chanina, v'itema Reb Chananya, hacha be'esrog shechantu peirosav kodem tesvav de'idach shvat askinam. What are we talking about? Hacha, in this case, we're talking about an esrog, shechantu, it began to develop. The leaf fell off and it became a fruit before tesvav of the previous year, the idach shvat askinam. We're dealing with the previous year entirely. Ubedin hu afilu kodem lechein, and halacha should be the same whether or not it was before that time or that time. It doesn't matter. The fact that it was Aleph Shvat, it had nothing to. It wasn't because he was choosing to be like Beis Shammai. It just happened to be the day that he pulled it off the tree. That's what Rabbi Akiva, within the frame of Rabbi Chananya, would say. However, Ravina gives another answer 2/3 of the way down. Ravina Amar, no, it's actually not the case that we're talking about a previous year. Rather, Karuch V'Tani, we have to blend the two parts of the Mishnah together. Lo echad b'shvat haya, ela tesvav b'shvat haya. When Rabbi Akiva pulled the esrog off of the tree, it was not the first of Shvat, which would have aligned with the Shita of Beis Shammai, but rather ela tu b'shvat haya, which aligns with the Shita of Beis Hillel. Below minhag Beis Shammai Beis Hillel nahagba, and because the date wasn't the first, but rather the 15th, that wasn't what he was concerned about. But rather, as we learned on Shabbos, ela minhag Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer nahagba, just a machlokas between the two of them about whether or not we view Chanata, the development of the fruit, as the moment that we look at to establish its status as it relates to Shemitah. Is it Chanata or no? Is it Lakita? And says the Gemara, 10, 12 lines from the bottom, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Hashta de Amar Rabban Gamliel, Esro Gachar Lekitaso, Isuro Kiyerek. So this is a very, very interesting line. Rabba says, now that we know, because we saw that Rabbi Akiva gave double maestros because of the machlokas Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabban Gamliel was of the opinion that it all follows Lakita, and that's Kiyerek. Maybe, therefore, we should say, says the Gemara, Rosh Hashana Shelo Tishrei. So I guess that makes sense. We did say that maestros follows Aleph Tishrei, but an esrog grows on a tree. So So it seems like Rabbah, who's an Amora, Rabbah in the name of Rav Huna, gives this strange position that an esrog tree would really follow Aleph Tishrei and not Tu B'Shvat. Says the Gemara, that's really not simple. Meisvei Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer. We have a brisa. What does Reb Shimon ben Elazar say? Liket esrog erev Tu B'Shvat ad shelo tavo hashemesh. A person plucks an esrog before the sun sets on Tu B'Shvat, and then v'chazar v'liket mishatavo hashemesh, and then he picks one once Tu B'Shvat actually kicks in. So the halacha is 5 lines from the bottom. Ein tormenu maisrin mizeh alzeh. The 2 different esrogim, they're not part of the same year of meiser. Why? So this brisa very clearly indicates that an esrog tree is not going to have a Rosh Hashana of Tishrei, but rather it should be a Rosh Hashana of Tu B'Shvat, so much so that we distinguished down to the minute that if you pluck an esrog prior to Shkia on Tu B'Shvat, so it's really Yud Daled Shvat, so then that's previous year. And after that, and once the Shkia hits, then it's going to be the next day. We already have our question, but the brisa continues 3 lines from the bottom. Let's say that one has an esrog that's bridging from the 3rd year of the Shemitah cycle into the 4th year. So then how do we look at it? Shlishis meiser rishon u'meiser sheni, and revis is meiser sheni u'meiser rishon u'meiser sheni. So this, we're not going to get into this now. We did speak about this on Shabbos as to how the 3rd year was different to the previous years. But in regards to the first part of the brisa, we have a problem. Man, turning to the top of Tes Vav Amud Aleph, man shamas le de azil basar lekita. Who had we said when trying to describe the sheet of Rabbi Akiva, where he said that there was a double meiser given, one for the previous year and one for the current year? What did he say was the moment in time that we look at? He had said that it was lekita. That's Rabban Gamliel. The Katani Shvat. But this brisa says that the Rosh Hashana is not Tishrei, that the Rosh Hashana is Shvat. So how could Rabbi Bar Rav Huna at the bottom of Yadal and Amud Beis say that the Rosh Hashana for Esrogim is going to be Tishrei? Hare, this brisa in the name of Reb Shimon ben Elazar is explicit that the Rosh Hashana, what we look at, the line in the sand for distinguishing when the fruit should be ne'esar from, when it should get its meiser, is Shvat. So says the Gemara, you made an error, and your quote of Rabbi Bar Rav Huna of the Amora was incorrect. That quote started 10, 12 lines from the bottom. We're now going to correct that. This is the line that we say when we misunderstood an Amora. If you're going to say that Rabbi Bar Rav Huna had a statement, here is what it should be. 3rd line, Amar Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, Afal Gab, even though the Amar Rabban Gamliel Esrog Achar Lakita Kiyarek, even though it's true that Rabban Gamliel says that when it comes to an esrog that we follow Lakita, that we follow the time at which the esrog is plucked. And that is similar to a yerek, in which case we would have thought that really Rosh Hashanah should have been like Tishrei, like the yerek, because it's after Lakita. That's not the case. Rosh Hashanah Shelo Shvat. Beautiful. Now the Gemara asks a side question on the brisa that we just learned. If you looked at the bottom, 3 lines from the bottom of Yadal and Amud Beis, the brisa brought a case of Haisa Shlishis Nichneses L'Revius. But that's a little weird because on Shabbos we spoke about a case of the 2nd year going into the 3rd. Why here did the Gemara change its example from 2nd year going into 3rd to focus on the 3rd year going into the 4th? Stay consistent. It doesn't matter which sample you give. All we're trying to show is where is the line in the sand, halachically speaking. Why would you change it? So says the Gemara, 5 lines down, why is it that on Shabbos when we were learning, we said the Katanim Haisa Shniya Nichneses L'Shlishis, that we have year 2 going into 3. Umayshnahacha on the Bryce at the very bottom of Yudalad Amud Beis, it changes gears on us. Umayshnahacha Diktani Im Haisa Shlishis Nichneses L'Revis. Why does it change from 2nd and 3rd to 3rd and 4th? Stay consistent, right? Why do the Bryces change gears? So the Gemara says 8, 9 lines down on Tes Vav Amud Aleph. I'll tell you why. Milsa agav orche kamash malan. We're learning a tangential but important point, and that is the following: the esrog kashya le yada. When people touch the esrog tree too much, it slows down the growth. The aidi de memashmashe be kule alma b'shvis, since it's hefker during the year of shvis, and therefore people are allowed to touch it. Lo ta'in pri atlas shinin. It slows down the growth significantly. So you're right. We could have given the example of 2 to 3, but what we're really doing is the example of 3 to 4. And all we're learning in that is to show that there is what to be gained in knowledge, and that is that when people touch an esrog tree, it slows down the process tremendously by many years. And we'll discuss that more a little bit later today. About a quarter of the way down on Tes Vav Amud Aleph, Ba'amine Rav Yochanan me Rav Yana. Rav Yochanan says to Rav Yanai, Esrog Rosh Hashana Shelo Emasai. When is the Rosh Hashana of an Esrog? This is and why are we asking this question? Didn't we just discuss this? So this is where the history comes into effect. We need to know what we're talking about. This Gemara in flow is out of order because Rabbah is old, was 2 generations after Rav Yochanan. So in our previous discussions of Rabbah and our struggling to understand what he meant, we concluded that the Rosh Hashana was Shvat. We did. But Rav Yochanan died already. He was gone. So now we're going back in time. Just here's like kind of like the interlude. What the Gemara is kind of like connecting is that's what Rabbah said in the 3rd century. But we forgot to speak about something, which was Rav Yochanan. And let's see what he said. So says the Gemara, Bamine Rav Yochanan me Rav Yanai, Esrog Rosh Hashana Shelo Emosai. So then Rav Yanai responds to Rav Yochanan, Amar Le, Shvat. So then Rav Yochanan says back, hold on. Shvat de Chodashim. Is it that we're looking at Shvat as it relates to the months? We know, of course, that the Jewish calendar is a blend of the lunar and solar calendars, and the month of Shvat can fall out in a span of 30 plus days in either direction, away from its norm, right? Like this coming Shvat, Nisan is Shvat Adar. It's Shvat Adar, right? So this coming Shvat is going to be at its normal time. But Adar is going to double this year. So the next Shvat will be 30 days later than this year's Shvat, which means that we're later in the development of the sun and therefore the development of the trees. We're further along in the season. So asks Rabbi Yochanan, what are we talking about? Is it the halachic aspect of we need the month of Shvat and that's the line in the sand? Or is it a question of the development of the trees? Or do we say, is it Shvat de Chodashim or Shvat de Tkufa? Or are we looking at Shvat as it relates to the season? Teves is the beginning. Teves, Shvat is the middle of the sunny season, but if it's pushed off 30 days because we're later on in the year, so what do we look at? That's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara responds, Amarle de Chodashim. Ba'mine Rava me Rav Nachman. So Rava says, Va'amri la Rav Yochanan me Rav Yanai. Hais Hashana meuberes mahu. This I was kind of foreshadowing this idea. So Va'amri la Rav Yochanan me Rav Yanai. Hais Hashana meuberes mahu. Amarle halach achar rov shanim. We just go based on what is the norm. And what is the norm? The norm is Shvat. The norm is whatever we normally do, which is the month of Shvat. And that's how the Gemara concludes. Now we're going to see a machlokas between Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna, and this will take about an amud to learn a very nuanced discussion about Lakita and Chanata. Let's jump in. Third of the way down. Amar Rabbah, Esrog bas shishis shenichnasa l'shvis. If you have an esrog that is a bas shishis, it's the Chanata. It actually began to blossom. The fruit began to blossom in the 6th year. Shenichnasa l'shvis, and it entered into the 7th year. So the halacha is p'tura min ha-maiser. It's exempt from maiser, which is a feature of Shemitah, because everything is hefker in a Shemitah year. So it's p'tura min ha-maiser, u'p'tura min ha-biur. And at the same time, it's p'tura min ha-biur, which means that we don't really have to treat it fully as a day of Shemitah. So it seems to be that we've kind of split and bifurcated the day into 2. Ubas Shvi'is, if it was the 7th year, Shenichnasa l'shmi'is, where really the Bas Shvi'is in the 7th year, that was when the Chanata happened, when the fruit began to blossom. And Shenichnasa l'shmi'is p'tura b'maiser, and if it entered into the 8th year, that's when it was plucked. So then, this is actually a mistake. The Gemara says it shouldn't say p'tura b'maiser, it should be chayeves b'maiser. That's the Shita of the Baal HaMa'or here, in the back of our Gemara, quoted here on the side by the Hagos V'Tzionim. It should say chayeves b'maiser, because it's a non-Shemitah year, v'chayeves b'biur, and it also is chayev b'biur. So Amar le Abaye, I don't understand your Shita. Bishlam Seifa, I understand the end, the second case, where the 7th year is going into the 8th year. That's l'chumra. You want it to be strict, so okay, you are a chayeves b'biur, I understand that. Ela Reisha, but in the first case, P'tur min ha-biur amai. If you were concerned about the possibility that maybe this is actually Shvis, that maybe this is actually Shemitah, so why weren't you machmir at all? Amai. Did you want to say de'em or zil basar chanata? If you want to say, oh, maybe we just follow the beginning blossoming of the esrog, that can't be. Ihachi, if you want to say that we're concerned about chanata, then it should have been techayev b'maiser. We should have said that it might have been chayev and maiser in the first case, because if the chanata is the establishing factor, that was in year 6, and you should be chayev and maiser that year. So Amar le, you can't do that. We had to be lenient in that first case, to not be worried about maiser. Amar le, yad hakol memash ba. Everyone who walks in the field in that 7th year, even though the chanata took place in year 6, but everybody's touching the tree. V'at amris techai b'maiser. Everyone's walking in, they think it's all hefker because it's a Shemitah year. They don't know that tree was planted in the year prior. Maybe you should put a sticker on it. Maybe that's what people do. I don't know. But that should be the concern, is that we should say that it's techai b'maiser. Rav Hamnuna Amar, Rav Hamnuna argues against all of this and says as follows. Rav Hamnuna says halfway down on Tes Vav Amid Aleph, Rav Hamnuna Amar, Bas Shishis Shenichneses L'Shvis, if you have something that's chanata in year 6, the esrog begins to blossom in year 6, shenichneses l'shvis, and it is nichneses l'shvis, which means that it enters into the 7th year. That's when it's plucked. Le'olam shishis. It is considered entirely to be a year 6 fruit. Ubas shvis hanichneses l'shminis. If it was the year later, where the year 7 was the chanata and the year 8 was the actual plucking, le'olam shvis. That's actually shvis. So says the Gemara, that's our machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna, but that doesn't work for everybody because the Brisa doesn't seem to fit for this. Meisvei, the Brisa reads as follows. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of a different Reb Shimon, Esrog ba'shishis shenichneses l'shviis, if you have, and it's the same case, but the halacha we will see doesn't work with the previous 2 shitas that we learned. In a case where you have a ba'shishis, that is where an esrog, the chanata, the actual growth of the esrog began in year 6. Shenichneses l'shvis, that it was plucked in the 7th year. P'tura mina meiser u'p'tura mina biur. It's completely exempt from meiser and from biur. She'ein lecha davar shechayev b'meiser elim kein gadal b'chiyuv v'nilkat b'chiyuv. This is a very strict shita to say. I guess it's a kula and a chumrah, but the Gemara says that there's no such thing as a chiyuv meiser unless the gadal b'chiyuv, unless it grows fully in year 6, v'nilkat b'chiyuv, and it's actually gathered in year 6, and that didn't happen. It was gathered in year 7. Ubas shvi shenichneses l'shminis, in a case where the chanata, where the fruit began to grow in the 7th year, and then it went into the 8th year, and that one is when it was plucked, and p'tura mina meiser, p'tura mina biur, there too, same halacha, that there's no meiser in this case. She'ein lecha davar shechai b'biur, there is no biur here, elohim kein gadol b'shvis v'nilkat b'shvis, and in the seifa of this case of the Brisa, it was gadol b'shvis, but it was not nilkat b'shvis, and reisha kasha Rav Hamnuna, the beginning of this Brisa doesn't fit with Rav Hamnuna, and the seifa kasha bein the Rabbah, bein the Rav Hamnuna. And basically what the Gemara is asking is like this. We seem to have 2 different tracks. Do we follow chanata, or do we follow lakita? And this was the chakira that I started with today. When you are someone who owns a massive orchard, and the fruits have been grown in the year prior, and they're still on the tree during the year of Shemitah, do we follow chanata, in which case there are no halachos of shvis about that? Pluck them, eat them, they're yours. Or no, do we say that they are a bar shvis and they are subject to all of the halachos therein? And the Gemara says that Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna seem to not really fit with the Brisa. What do we do about that? So the Gemara answers 5 lines from the bottom of Tes Vav Amid Aleph. The Gemara answers Tanoihi. This is really fundamentally a machlokes in the Tanoim. The Tanya, and we learned this Brisa many moons ago in Maseches Sukkah. Yeah. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Av Tulmus Heid Mishum Chamisha Zakenim. Av Tulmus was a Tana, and he was Heid Mishum Chamisha Zakenim. He gave testimony from 5 Zakenim about the following. Esrog Achar Lakitaso Lemaiser. That when it comes to an esrog, we follow the lakita. We look at the moment that it's plucked and not the moment that it starts to grow. V'Rabboseinu nimnu be'usha. The rabbis disagreed with them. V'amru achar lakitaso bein. They didn't argue, I should say. They added. What did the rabbis say in usha? V'amru echad lakitaso bein lemaiser bein l'shvi'is. It's true not only by maiser, but it's also true by shvi'is. Now, what's weird about this comment of the Rabboseinu is that they're not really contrasting with something that Avtulmus said. What did Avtulmus say? He was only talking about Meiser. The rabbi said, agree, and also by Shvis. So says the Gemara, Shvis man dekar shmei. Was anyone talking to you about Shvis? Why are you talking about Shvis? As we turn to the top of Tes Vav Amid Beis, the Gemara says, you're right, and it must therefore be that we're missing something. Top of Tes Vav Amid Beis, first line, Chasure mechsera v'hachik tani. This is really pshat in what the Brisa of Avtulmus should have said. Here is the Brisa of Avtulmus. The Brisa reads, V'achiktani esrog achar lakitasa lemaiser v'achar chanata l'shvis. Really, Avtolmos had a split shita. The first part of his shita was that an esrog in regards to lakita, that we established meiser based on plucking. However, when it comes to shvis, Avtolmos was of the opinion that it's based on when the fruit begins to grow. V'rabosenu nimnu beusha. The rabbis argued and said achar lakitaso bein lemaiser bein l'shvis. So that's the machlokas between Avtolmos and the Rabbanon, that they agree that in regards to meiser, the lakita, the plucking off of the tree, is when we actually measure meiser. However, there's a machlokas between them in regards to shvis. Do we say like Avtulmus that it's chanata, or do we say like the Rabbanan that it's not chanata but rather lakita? And this machlokas was reflected in regards to the Amoraim by Rabbah and Rav Hamnuna, and that's why their shitas didn't really seem to fit, because they were each holding like different party lines. So clearly this machlokas about chanata and lakita as it relates to shvis was a long-standing machlokas from the Tanaim into the Amoraim. What do we do halacha l'maisa? So the Gemara starts to talk about that on the fourth line of Tesvav Amud Beis. Itmar, a statement from the Amoraim. Rav Yochanan v'Reish Lakish Amrei Tarvaihu Esrog bas shishis shenichnasa l'shvis le'olam shishis. Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they both agree, they conclude that when it comes to an esrog that was chanata in year 6, it began to grow in that year, and it went into the 7th year, and that's when it was plucked. How do we look at that? Le'olam shishis, that means it's chanata. That means that we follow, if it's a 6th year, and it started growing in the 6th year, so chanata is obviously going to be the determining factor. But says the Gemara, another statement by Rav Yochanan, similar. Ki asa Ravin amar Rav Yochanan. Ravin said in the name of Rav Yochanan, Esrog bas shishis shenichnas al shvis afilu kizayis. Even if it was only a kizayis at the turn of the 7th year, v'nases kikar, and it turned into a huge growth of food, a loaf of, at least by volume, what looks like a loaf of bread. Chayavan aleh mishum tevel. When are you chayav on something because of tevel? Not during a Shemitah year, because during Shemitah everything's hefker. So therefore we see here yet again in the name of Rav Yochanan that what we are talking about is that chanata is king. That is the shita of Avtulmus against the shita of the Rabosenu. And that is how the Gemara concludes on this part of the sugya. But we're not quite done yet, because the Gemara is going to continue with a new shita in the Tanaim that we have yet to see on this topic, one that splits our answers with the classic Bamed Dvar Mamurim, a qualification that makes us view things differently. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught us, Ilan shechantu peirosav kodem tu bishvat. If there is a tree whose fruits began to blossom and the leaf that's covering the bud as the fruit begins to grow falls off, if that happens before Tu Bishvat, misaser l'shana she'avra. Then, had this been, let's just call it, this past year's Tu Bishvat, then it belongs to last year. And if it's afterwards, achar Tu Bishvat, if the chanata, if the leaf falls off and the fruit starts to grow after this time, then misaser l'shana haba. Then the halacha is that it is next year's fruits. However, and this is where things get a little new for us. Amar Rav Nechemya Bamed Dvarim Amurim. When do we say that this is true? This distinction of chanata. Bamed Dvarim Amurim. That's be'ilan she'oseh shtei brechos b'shana. That's a tree that has 2 blossoms of fruits in every year. Now, I don't know much about trees, but the Gemara seems to say that that's not normal. Shtei brechos sal kadaitach? Do trees really have a double blossoming throughout the year? I don't know enough to even ask the question on my own. If anyone is a botanist, please let me know. Says the Gemara, Ela ema ke'ein shtei brechos. It's similar to having multiple brechos, similar of having multiple harvests within 1 year, in that it's very slow growing. Aval, ilan ha'osa brecha achas. If there is a tree that has a very narrow span of time in which it's harvested, only what is considered to be brecha achas, kigon dekalim, the dekel tree, v'zeisim, v'charuvin, all of these trees, afal pi shechantu perusim kodem tu bishvat, misasr l'shana haba. There, if it's brecha achas, as opposed to shtei brechos, so then the halachos are different. We only use tu bishvat as the distinguishing factor if it's a slow-growing, developing tree. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Nagu ha'am b'charuvin ki Reb Nechemya. The world agrees when it comes to charuvin with Reb Nechemya and his distinction of 1 brecha versus 2 brechos. That when there's 2 brechos, when it's a slow-growing harvest, then we use the distinctions of Tu Bishvat. But if it's not, then we don't. So says the Gemara, Eisvei Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish poses a question to Rabbi Yochanan. Hold on 1 second. Benos suach, you have these white types of figs. Shvis shelahen Shnia is in year number 2. Mipnei she'osin l'shalosh shanim. The reason that it's Shvi'is is going to be referenced in year 2 is because she'oseh l'shalosh shanim, it takes 3 years, which means that the Chanata is king. And how can you say what you said above? That's not true. Chanata doesn't always work. So Ishtik, Rav Yochanan didn't respond. And from here until the end of the page, the Gemara is going to try and understand what Rav Yochanan's silence meant. Amarle Rav Abba HaKohen, the Rav Yosei HaKohen. Amai Ishtik, why was Rav Yochanan silent? He easily could have gotten out of this by saying, Ema lach ana Rav Nechemya, ve'at amrsli Rabbanan. I'm holding like the sheet of Rav Nechemya, and you're coming back to me with the sheet of the Rabbanan. I don't hold like the sheet of the Rabbanan. Let me be me and you be you. All is well. I mean, we don't have to agree with one another. We all have Tanaim that we can hold like. Says the Gemara, that argument would never have worked because of the famous principle of Yachid v'Rabim halacha kirabim. Rav Yochanan can't hold like whoever he wants without good reason. You can't just hold like Rav Nechemya because you want to. So therefore, says the Gemara, V'at amasli Rabbanan mishum de amar le shavkas Rabbanan v'avadas Rav Nechemya. They're going to say back to him, how you can't leave the Rabbanan Rav Yochanan. You can't leave the Rov to paskin like the Yachid. That's not allowed. Yachid v'Rabim halacha kirabim. So therefore, that doesn't work. Okay, fine. 8 lines from the bottom. Maybe Rav Yochanan could have argued back. Ka'amin alach nohagu ve'at amrisli isura. I'm talking about a minhag, and you're talking about isur v'heter. Totally different ball game. How could you even compare the two? One is minhag, and one is isur v'heter. Says the Gemara, that's a ridiculous argument. The amar le b'makom isura kinagu shavkinan lahu. We're talking about an isur, and you have a minhag lekula. No, we're not going to ignore you. Your minhag is a minhag shtus. It's a minhag tos. You're not allowed to do that in the face of an isser. That for sure won't work. Okay, says the Gemara, a suggestion that actually works. Vidilma, 5-6 lines from the bottom. Vidilma, v'leimale ki amin alach ana meiser charuvin derabanan. When does Rabbi Nechemya say his leniency? That's only by the charuvin, by the carob trees where there's a din derabanan. However, va'at amrisli shvi'is deoraisa. You're asking me a kasha reish lakish from something that's a din deoraisa? So that's a good question. So Ella Amar Rabbi Abba HaKohen. Rabbi Abba HaKohen says back to the person he's speaking to, and he says, Timihani im yeshiva Reish Lakish le'tshuva zu. I would be pretty surprised if Reish Lakish posed this question to Rav Yochanan. The Gemara says, weren't you reading above? Im Heshiva, if he'd asked this question? Ha'osva, he did ask this question. And that's where the silence came from. So the Gemara says, Ela Ema. No, the Gemara doesn't mean whether or not he asked it. What the Gemara means is, would Rav Yochanan had embraced the distinction to say that when we're talking about the carob tree, the charuvin, and we're holding like Rav Nechemya, that's only by dinei derabanan. But everything else that we're talking about is dinei deoraisa. Im kibla Rav Yochanan, im lo kibla. We don't know if he would have accepted it. So we'll stop right here at the end of the page. Tomorrow morning, Daf Tezayin, a beautiful Agadata, kimat beginning to end, about Rosh Hashana, about the different types of Svarim, a Beinoni, the famous discussions by Rosh Hashana. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
What time is sunrise tomorrow? You may need the sun for.
On the south side of